Hi everyone, it's Lindsay. I'm back today with another video, this time on creating a multi-pattern background. Now here's a look at the supplies that I'm going to be using today, but the main one is the new Sorted Shapes 1 stencil from Craft and Desert Divas. Here's a look at that stencil. Now this has 4 different patterns on it. Each is a 3x3 block approximately. And I'm going to be using all of those today. So the first thing I want to do is I have a piece of cream cardstock. This is lightweight cardstock and it measures 4¼ by 5½ inches. So it's going to cover an entire card base. Now I'm using painter's tape here, but you can use washi tape as well for this. I just need to mask off different areas. Now I am not planning this out ahead of time. I am just moving my masking tape around as I go and put in these patterns. So the first one I masked off was a little bit of a triangle, but it has 4 sides, so I guess it's not really a triangle, is it? But I masked that off in the top left-hand corner, and now I'm going to use the large dot pattern on the stencil and some vintage photo distressing, and I'm going to be inking up just this little portion that I have masked off with that pattern. Now the next thing I want to do is start moving around my masking tape. So I'm going to cover up that triangle that I just made, and I'll go ahead and mask off another portion of this card base, and that's going to be the right side. So the next one I'm going to use is this little hexagon pattern or chicken wire pattern, and I use the same distress ink here. Now this same technique could be used for any number of cards. You could even switch up the different ink colors you're using if you wanted to make this really bright and fun. I'm going for a more sepia toned card today because I'm using the There For You stamp set, and I've already colored up my images. So I am pulling color from that, and that's why I chose Vintage Photo. Now, figuring out how you want to mask different portions of this is all part of the challenge with this technique. You just need to go ahead and make sure that you have masked off the portions you've already inked up. So in this case, I needed to make sure that I had that top left-hand corner masked off before I came in with this small dots pattern right below that. I didn't want to mix any of those patterns together. Then the next one I want to make sure I have masked off is that small dot pattern because I'm going to be working right next to it. Now you can see here I have worked from kind of the left corner to the right corner, and now I'm working my way around the outside edge of the paper. Now you can do this any number of ways. You can work from the left to the right. You could do complete triangles all the time. You could do complete squares all the time. It really is up to you. I'm just kind of doing mish mash of shapes. Ooh, that's a tongue twister. But I'm just doing different shapes, different patterns, not really a plan, but you could plan this out as well if you wanted to. One thing I am making sure of though is that I'm not putting too many of the same patterns very close to each other. So I don't want too many of the chicken wires close to each other. I don't want too many of the chevrons very close to each other. There are going to be times that they do end up relatively close, and that's okay. You really can't avoid it, but I just want to try and avoid it as much as I can. Now I went ahead and masked off the majority of the left side, so now I'll continue to work my way down into the right. So I've got 3 pieces of painter's tape that I'm working with now, and I never went above that with my painter's tape. I made it work with just 3 pieces. Painter's tape is relatively easy, or I actually did use 4, I guess, but I never went above that, and this is a relatively cheap product, so it is very cheap and inexpensive technique to do. Next up, I'm going to work on this little triangle here, and I am going with the small dot pattern here since I hadn't used that very much on this card yet. Now, in cases where the pattern doesn't quite fit across the place where you've masked, that's okay. Just move it over, line up part of the pattern you've already done, and then just finish it out. It's very simple and easy to do. Now I'm going to work next with the chevron pattern in the kind of mid right-hand side there and just finish that portion off. And then finally, I've got this last little bit right on the bottom here that I'll go ahead and peel up the tape that was covering it. And I did go ahead and I was thinking, should I make this 1 pattern? Should I cut it into 2? I ended up cutting it into 2 just because I wanted to fit a few more patterns on there. And I also wanted to cut an area out where 2 chevrons wouldn't be touching each other. So the last little portion right there, I'm going to go ahead and finish off with the pattern that I first started out with in the top left-hand corner, that large dot pattern. Then I can go ahead and remove all of the painter's tape. You do need to be careful when removing this, just so that you don't rip your cardstock. There were a few places where I did. In order to avoid that, just make sure that whenever you first stick down your painter's tape, you kind of press it against your shirt a few times or on your arm. That's going to get rid of a little bit of that stick, and it'll be easier to pull up later on. Now, for the rest of my card, it was very simple and easy to do. I started off with the building dies. I attached both dies to a piece of cream cardstock with some liquid glue. Then I ran those through my die cutting machine with the circle die to kind of make a focal point. Now, next up, I have a piece of grass border that I went ahead and die cut from some brown cardstock. I die cut that with the circle border on the very bottom as well. Then I'm using the larger scallop circle to die cut some craft cardstock that's going to be my mat. I put that grass on the bottom of the buildings. That's going to be like a little focal point kind of scene there, and then I'll build my scene out from that. So I've got the little storefront from the There For You stamp set, and again, I colored this in with very sepia toned colors here. So a lot of browns, a lot of grays. I threw in a few reddish browns for the building, but other than that, I kept this card very muted. Now I'm using liquid glue here on the back to go ahead and glue that craft circle, scallop circle, right into the center of that kind of pattern paper that I've made. Now, I did attach the building with some fun foam and double-sided adhesive just to pop it away from that scene behind it. Then next up, I want to add my little mouse in his box to the right-hand side of the store. And again, I used some double-sided adhesive and fun foam on the back of him. Now, these images that I'm using today are from the There For You stamp set from Craft and Desert Divas. This is just being released today, and it's for a very special reason. You can go read about that over on the Craft and Desert Divas blog, as well as you can go and visit the designers' blogs and read their opinions on it as well. Some of you may agree and some of you may not, and that's okay. We can all have different opinions. So the next thing I did is I went ahead and I placed my flag banner right on the top of this scene, and I stamped I'll Be There For You from the same stamp set on that. I went ahead and mounted that with fun foam and double-sided adhesive as well. And then I'm going to mount this entire panel onto a much sturdier A2 top folding card base that I made from some white cardstock. Now this cream cardstock wasn't very heavy, it was a lightweight cardstock. That's why I'm attaching it to a card base and didn't make a cream card base. It just wasn't heavy enough to hold everything I wanted to put on top of it. But once that was finished up, I just went ahead and lined that up and placed it down, and that completed the card for today. Now whenever you want to place down a panel on top, it helps to kind of line up one side and then press it down. If you have any leftover hanging off, you can always go back with your paper trimmer and trim that up. But there's a closer look at the finished card, and here are a few finished photos as well. On the left side of your screen, you'll see a few different links you can click on. The top will take you to a video of mine you might enjoy watching next. The bottom left will take you to my blog, where you'll read more about this stamp set and find the supply list. And the bottom right will subscribe you to my channel if you aren't already. Thanks so much for watching today, and happy crafting!